Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's Healthcare World Series session. My name is Steve Gardner. I'm the Managing Director at Healthcare World. And this morning we'll be discussing the need for clinical trials, the diversity in clinical trials around the world, with particular reference to the Middle East and some of the consequences of the lack of diversity currently seen in such trials. It's shocking to me that 90% of the world's pharmaceuticals are tested only on Caucasian populations. We'll be exploring some of the consequences of that and some of the reasons and ideas about how we can change that for the good of everybody, particularly starting in the Middle East. I'm joined this morning by an absolutely fantastic panel, some familiar faces to Healthcare World and some new ones. In no particular order, we have Raisa Afzal, who is Senior Legal Counsel at Al-Tamimi for Regulation. We have the incredible Dr. Ibtisam Al-Bastaki, Director of PPP and Partnerships at the Dubai Health Authority. Hinda Dagag, who is Head of Genetics at SEHA. Mansour Ahmed, Executive Director at Colliers, and Mike Faye, the founder and Chief Executive of Zantaris, clinical CRO, virtual CRO from France. So where I'd like to start here, panel, and I'll start, Mike, with you, if I may. Why has this happened? Why is there a lack of diversity in clinical trials? Mike, perhaps you could set the problem out for us.
Yes, thanks, Stephen. Thanks first. I'd like to be thankful with Healthcare World for giving us the opportunity to be part of this amazing panel of discussion. I think I'd like to say it's maybe some background, because I think you may have heard we had a FDA guidance about improving diversity in clinical trials. So we had recently a lot of increasing sponsor focus on diversity. I think this is on every clinical trials which are launched about diversity. But the problem is, despite this recommendation, despite this high focus, we have noticed that we still have a huge gap in terms of diversity. I'm just taking one concrete and recent example about US, because this is about FDA. Despite high focus for the last decades, we still have declining participation of the Black American. So this is global. This issue, this is not only about in Europe, this is not about in EU, this is everywhere. So just to go back to your question after this background, I think there is many rationales. And again, we could speak 2 hours just about this one, but I'd just like to give some background. And if there is anyone who would like to step in, please, of course, feel free. So I think the first one, in terms of the history, this is about the historical mistrust. I think, as you know, we had some past unethical issues and research practice. And I think I can even take one recent example, because I'm French. In France, we just learned about 30 years of experience which have been taken on patients without any consent, and an ethical research ethics critic committee. So we have many minority groups which have been deep-rooted for mistrust of medical research, which can take them very hesitant to participate into clinical trials. One of the other reasons, which could be a reason for lack of diversity, this is a socioeconomic barriers. People from lower socioeconomic background, I think, may face difficulties due to several factors. I think you have transportation, lack of time, insurance, or I would say better knowledge, because if you are familiar with clinical trials, you may know that transportation and insurance are already part of the package. So this may be one of the barriers which impact the lack of problem. I think another one could be the limited outreach or recruitment, because the lack of representation in these research communities. I think what does it mean? It's researchers, I think the one which are hiring and recruiting patients, may not be having sufficient effort to reach out to diverse population. I think because lack of time, because of knowledge, or they don't have maybe the necessary cultural competence to engage with these communities. So there was a lot of different issues such as language and cultural barriers. You may have also some LGBT criteria. So you have a lot of issues that we could work all together in order to improve diversity, in order to make sure that the results are generalizable and can be applied for a wider range of individuals.
Thanks for that, Mike. I think that sets the scene quite nicely. Ibtisim, I'll come to you next, if I may. Are drug manufacturers, should they be focusing more on the Middle East and its populations when it comes to clinical trials?
Indeed, absolutely, Steve. It's very important to understand about the Middle East culture, as well the society and the background and the diversity. So if you come to United Arab Emirates, I mean, there is a huge diversity in terms of number of population with different segmentations. And that's what make a bit of uniqueness in the setup of the country. And that's the reason, even through my position being as a director of investment, we have approached by many companies from pharmaceutical, medtechs, or digital health. So a lot of them, they would like to test and understand the market very well because of the different age group. You know that majorities are living here between age of 16 to 64 when it comes to the residents, and you have male dominant than females, and plus you have young populations, and you have a different chronic illness as well, and that's what makes even UAE as an advantage to many other companies. Similarly, if you go even to other Middle Eastern country, but you will find like Saudi Arabia, they have more dominant of the national population comparing to the non-nationals when you compare it to United Arab Emirates, where we have more non-national comparing to the nationals. However, there is a lot of still a kind of resistance, or I would say some barriers, where the community needs to come forward towards the clinical trials, because they really need to gain such a trust. They need to have, understanding of what the purpose of it. There is a lot of awareness needs to be done by the government and the public sector and private sector, I mean, for the population to come forward to be part of the clinical trials.
Thanks for that, Ibtisim. Seha, Indy, you would say how you're based in Abu Dhabi. You've also obviously been one of the key individuals behind the Emirati Genome Program. Is that a problem that you see in terms of getting individuals to come forward and be part of these kind of clinical trials, and indeed part of your own program?
Well, when we are talking about the Emirati Genome Program, I have to say that it seems like the response rate has been absolutely tremendous, which is really wonderful to see. And I think this is partially or hugely due to the fact that people have trust in their government, and that they want to come forward, and they do have the understanding that this is going to lead to huge benefits for them and for their future generations. Now, when we talk about clinical trials, I think it's a little bit more complex, than just being a participant in a project such as the EGP, the Emirati Genome Program. I mean, we definitely know that the vast majority of research and product development in the world, certainly in Europe, uses people of the white descent. I think approximately for every 1,000 Europeans, you get maybe one person of a Middle Eastern descent. This is what I found in the latest study.
That's a scary statistic.
Absolutely. And I mean, one of the reasons why this is happening is also the fact that these biotechnology companies and companies that are, invested in drug discovery and product discovery, what they really want to do, they want to bring their product to the market where they are, therefore they just want to utilize whatever population they already might have there. So one of the problems might be that what needs to happen is that these biotechnology companies need to be actually set up in different places. So they need to come to places like the UAE and other Middle Eastern countries where they will be more interested in utilizing the populations that we have, and perhaps targeting some of these medications more the existing population rather than being in Europe, targeting the European populations, and then somewhere down the line thinking about making the drugs universally available. So, there needs to be a little bit of a shift also in that aspect rather than just the population itself. And I think just one final thing that I would like to add is when we are talking about diversity, it's important to understand what do we mean by diversity. How do you define the diversity? Are we talking here just about the racial and ethnic background? Are we talking about the biological sex, age, pre-existing conditions? So there are a lot of different elements and parameters that we need to take into account.
That's a really, really helpful insight there, Hinda. And I guess that from your point of view, to answer the question that you raised there, is it a question that we need representation from all of those groups, not just to be thinking about racial diversity?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that's one of the things that we seem to have a tendency to focus on one or the other. Oh, we need female representation. Oh, we need people with the different ethnic background. But in reality, I think the scope just needs to widen all across the board. Obviously, much more easier said than done, but I think that's what we need to target for.
Thanks, Hinda. Mansour, I'll come to you. Hinda there talked about the one of the issues being the drug companies and the pharmaceutical companies needing to get themselves into the market and working in the market. Clearly, this is your area of expertise. Are you seeing these kind of pharmaceutical companies wanting to set themselves up and work in the Middle East? And are we seeing enough of them?
Yeah, I think we need to go a little bit one step, back and see that why they were not doing that. I think one of the key things, we have worked number of projects where we were working, talking to a couple of leading, organization. I won't take the name, and they were pharmaceutical as well as, the universities and the hospitals and other. I think one of the key things is the lack of R&D facilities. We have a lot of hospitals here. We have a lot of good hospitals there, very good quality of healthcare. We have basically, but what we lack is teaching hospitals. There's hardly any proper teaching hospitals are there, which are linked to then life sciences park, which is specialized in R&D. So I think that the thing is that where we feel is that one of the things is that the pharmaceutical companies were not looking to establish their factories and other, is lack of quality resources which they will require to basically run their factories and other. If you look at even in UAE, and I think Dr. Baski will basically will agree to me that most of the resources of workforce which is in healthcare sector and pharmaceutical, they come from outside. So you don't have that homegrown workforce is there. So I think one of the key thing is basically to enhance, first of all, the education system, the R&D part of it, and basically creating those life sciences park where all this R&D, so the whole system, the way, especially in US, it is there that there's a teaching university, hospital, R&D, and then the pharmaceutical companies are there who basically invent drugs there, and they basically do the trial and other. That is happening. Like Saudi is really taking a very big step in this regard. They would like to set up these life sciences parks so that there is more and more research is done locally. And when research is done locally, obviously the trial will also be mostly will be done locally. So I think for me, that's the thing is. Second thing is that before that, now the things are obviously changing, the rules and regulation and everything is changing, is basically the size of the market was very small, but now the market, as the population is increasing, that will going to have there is such a big market is there. And why we only look at GCC or MENA, we should look at GCC and Africa, basically all the Middle East and Africa. And if you look at the population of that, then that will be, probably more than 1/3 of the global population will be there in Middle East and Africa. The third thing is obviously lack of awareness. Most of the time, people think that they're being used, especially in Africa and other, they've been used as I will use the very blunt word, guinea pig, that they are basically testing some new drugs on them without telling them, no, that's actually going to benefit you and your next generations and other. So I think to summarize that, one of the key thing is lack of quality and specialized workforce, which will going to, and the whole ecosystem where education, health, and pharma and R&D are all under, one life sciences park or whatever you call it. I think that's the main thing which will going to, establishment of that will going to basically improve more and more investment from pharmaceutical companies in the region.
Thanks, Mansoor. Andy, you wanted to come back on this?
I just have one quick comment. I absolutely agree, and thank you for kind of summarizing it so beautifully, Mansoor, because that's exactly what needs to happen, and it is actually very positive because it seems that is where the UAE is headed. You know, Dr. Istifam can talk more to the Dubai side of things, but at least from the Abu Dhabi perspective, with the Department of Health, who are the custodians of the Emirati Genome Program, the idea is to actually become a regional life sciences hub. I think that, everybody is realizing what the missing pieces are, and it's just kind of how do you put all of that together. And one of the examples of how you can do that is to have a population-based sequencing program such as the Emirati Genome Program that will help you actually put it all together. And with the government being invested and committed to create a life sciences hub, I think we're on the right track. We might be lagging behind, but I think we are on the right track to doing that.
So from that point of view, Hinda, the fact that the Emirati Genome Program exists in itself is an encouragement to life sciences investment into the region. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, obviously, the end goal is that you want to improve the lives of the population as a whole. You want to improve the healthcare system for the future generations. So the Emirati Genome Program or any other similar programs have a huge clinical aspect of them, but it goes way beyond that. What you can do with it, creating the whole ecosystem from the perspective of bringing in the talent, attracting the talent, bringing in the research, doing the research with all of this data, creating space for drug discoveries, different treatments, targeting the populations that have been underrepresented. So it's just beautifully kind of set up to address many of the challenges that currently exist, and hopefully it will get there.
Thanks very much, Hinda. Racer, I'll come to you in a moment for a comment on whether the kind of legal and regulatory position is in place. Before that, though, Mike, you've got your hand up, and I've got a quick question also for Ibtisam. Mike, to you first.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I think very interesting, and I think thanks for Hinda and Mansoor. I think I'd just like to go back because first I would say that most of the big pharma are already there. Now, if I'm going are sitting in the UAE and in the Middle East. I think they all have entities here. However, I think if you look, and I think this is a deep dive into clinical trials, as I did my homework. If you look about a bit more into details, and I was comparing with the number of inhabitants, and I took countries which are not Hungary, for example, and Hong Kong, which has more or less, if I remember, similar number of inhabitants. You have roughly, and this is really a rough estimate, I think it's 10 times less clinical trials which are run in the UAE. And now out of these 10 times less, you have 20 times less of these trials which are interventional, which means if you have 1,000 trials which are run in Hungary, which is not in the top 5 or even top 10, and sorry for Hungarian people, but this is not on top 5 or top 10 people within EU, you have 20 times less clinical trials, interventional clinical trials. And as you know, interventional trials are the one which are bring innovative treatment, the one which could be the more promising for the population, because again, here we are all working together to make life and patients' life and improving patients' life because we care. And not just to circle back about this genome program, I think this is a huge opportunity. And I think thanks Inda, you gave some number. I think this is very impressive. And this is a gold mine for the pharmaceutical industry because it helps to support, for example, targeted drug development. You may have insight into a genomic data. You can develop targeted therapies. You can have identification of disease risk. So altogether, I think this is a huge gold mine, which frankly, I don't know why it's not making more awareness. Because as a former researcher, you know, and now working in clinical trials, they are all looking for biomarkers. So you have a gold mine, which is just sitting. You have patient diversity. You have a huge population, which is treatment naive because they don't benefit about the most innovative treatment. So I would say what they are doing.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks very much for that. Mansour, you've got your hand up. You want to come in. And then Racer, I promise I'll come to you now.
Yeah, I think very quickly, I just want to comment. Yes, all the pharmaceutical companies are there, but they're just producing they bring the formula and, you know, material and just producing it. What lacks here is research. And that comes to lack of education. That's how I wanted to add, basically.
No, thanks, Mansour. That's a very good point. It's one thing being there. It's another thing entirely to be doing the kind of innovative research work that we certainly feel, I think, as a group that they should be doing. Racer, is there any, from your point of view as a lawyer, is the legal and regulatory framework in place in the UAE, in the Middle East, to allow the kind of research that we think should be done there?
Unfortunately, there's nothing specifically addressing, you know, the diversity issue, because often with trials that are happening, you know, you have the regulatory bodies at the local regulators at DHA, DOH. They have their guidelines with regards to clinical trials, and you'll have an institutional review board that will approve trials. But whether they're asking questions to that level as to, you know, what's the minimum number or what's the ethnic mix or background, I don't believe that's expressly, you know, being dealt with at the moment. But I think it's something that there's a gap there, and I feel that if it was addressed, then that's something that would, you know, certainly, you know, make amends. But at the moment, unfortunately, there's nothing expressly, because you have to remember as well that, and I agree with the points that have been made by all the panel members. I mean, there's been huge growth in the healthcare sector here, but it's still sort of relatively quite young, isn't it, really? You know, if you think about it. So there's still a lot of development, and year on year, you know, MOH, DHA, DOH, they make improvements to their policies and regulations all the time. And I feel this is something they could do definitely with clinical trials, whether it's been brought to their attention specifically, you know, I would hope it has, but I feel it will be addressed, but it's a matter of raising it with them and asking that it is. But I think, you know, it will attract more talent to the region. And but, you know, at the moment, there's definitely a disparity. And that, as Mike said, raises real ethical concerns, because you've got a huge proportion of the population that will not have access potentially to proper, you know, healthcare outcomes because the data is sort of so skewed. So this is something I think hopefully potentially will come up, and certainly is something we'll raise ourselves in our conversations with the regulatory bodies so it can be addressed.
I think the first issue is actually attracting the numbers of clinical trials and attracting the actual research and development to the region in the first place. I think Ibtisam made the point brilliantly about the diversity of the population in the UAE very, very well. If we had more trials, Raisa, would it automatically follow that we would end up with more diversity because of the nature of the population?
I think it would actually, and I think that, you know, as I say, the regulatory body, you know, they update their rules and regulations, but because of the number of trials, and remember the focus has been with a lot of healthcare, and because you don't really have teaching hospitals here, the focus of a lot of healthcare facilities is really about making money. You know, that's more sort of been, you know, what they're doing, rather than focusing on research and actually looking at the benefits of research. And some now are actually looking more into that and, you know, developing that sector. But you've really got to have the whole infrastructure in place for research in order to sort of facilitate that and have it. But I think it will happen. It's just a matter of time, you know, because there's huge growth, and I think there's a lot of talent in the region, and I do believe it will be addressed. But I think more people, I think having a discussion, we're highlighting it, many people are highlighting it. So something, you know, fingers crossed it will be addressed.
This point about teaching hospitals and education and also research more generally, is this not part of the reason why the Dubai Academic Health Corporation was set up? You know, you've got the link there with Sheikh Rashid.
Yes, exactly. So I just wanted to make such a point, and that's one of the reasons why the transformation happened in Dubai, when we had the regulatory part needs to be segregated from the delivery part or the provider parts. And part of the Dubai Academy Health Corporation was to focus on academy and research and training programs, and to have more teaching hospitals, to attract even the clinical trials to the city itself. And that will eventually attract many companies to come in, not necessarily pharmaceutical. I'm very fond with the medtech companies, because there's a lot of things happening in the market that we really need to focus on. And this is something where we're really eager to have it, because it's going to have a really great impact on the patient positively from the clinical outcome. So, and this is one of the reasons I absolutely agree with all of you that yes, we're still lagging behind in terms of the clinical trials and researches. Don't forget, we're a very young population, small population as well. So comparing to the other countries, however, the beauty of it is the diversity and different age group. And that's basically where a lot of companies have reached out to us looking for clinical trials, pushing them towards public and private hospitals where they can have an agreement to test such new innovative products in the market.
And from that point of view, coming back to Mike's point about the sheer numbers of clinical trials, that's something you as DHA have been trying to address by creating the investment strategy to try and bring more investment in pharma. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So lately, what we have done during Arab Health, we signed with the free zone entity to attract more startups, and that's going indeed with the vision of His Highness when he launched Dubai 33 in terms of attracting startup companies to the market. You know, if you go to the past, you will see most of these startups came in and they didn't know what is the pathway, what is the process, how actually they need to end it up to the hospitals or the providers, whether it's a public or the private sector. So what we did, we signed with the Dubai Economical Integrated Free Zones, and because they have the setup for attracting those young innovative startup companies, and we wanted to focus mainly on medtech at this stage and maybe later on to the pharmaceutical, because of the complexity. So we try to go with something easier, faster. We can get some tangible results. So therefore, we've been reach out with many companies across the world. We're putting them in touch with the public and the private providers where they can test their product and see how it is beneficial to the market. And a majority, they are actually using Dubai as a hub, and then they can go outside Dubai to the region within GCC or MENA or even to the African countries. And we have seen many of them, whether these are products in their pathway of the FDA or any other accredited, from their home country, or they're already been accredited, but they want to assemble their product over here and use Dubai as a hub to move on. So, we've been seeing different flavors, I would say, and that gives us a lot of potential in terms of investments and economy, and even creating new jobs and opportunities to the people.
And of course, the issue here is the fact that it's not just about, as Mike said, you've got the big pharma companies there already, although they're not doing this kind of research and innovative work. You've got what Mansour talked about the R&D facilities, about the links with teaching hospitals. Those are some elements, and what you've just spoken to there, of course, is that there's a whole ecosystem in terms of the companies that support and get involved in facilitating these kind of clinical trials.
Absolutely. It should be like a triangle between the provider, populations, and the researcher. If you have these threes, okay, so therefore you can do something at least. So this is where we are focusing on.
Fantastic. I mean, I want to focus for a moment, if I may, on why. Why do we need diversity in clinical trials? What are the consequences if we don't have them? And Hinda, I want to come to you on this. You're the geneticist in the room. If we don't test new pharmaceutical products on a diverse population, what's the knock-on effect of that? Are we going to see unexpected results from products that have not been tested on individual?
Well, I mean, to kind of talk about it in more general terms at the beginning, if the trial populations don't really reflect the real world, obviously, logically thinking about it, it's going to create more roadblocks to finding better treatments and potential cures. I mean, this is just kind of as a general view. Now, from a genetic perspective, I know that not everybody can agree on how important genetics is. We all know that it plays a role, but to what extent is your genetic background important when it comes to these things? And there are some aspects where it's more important, some aspects where it's less important. But one example would be drug therapy. For example, it makes a huge difference when you are trying to find the right target, genetically speaking. And if we are looking at the specificity of certain drugs or even certain diagnostic tests, if they are designed with a certain specificity percentage based on the population that this drug was studied on or that the target was identified in, and then you give it to a different population with a different genetic background, definitely it can be affected. It can be affected tremendously or mildly, but the downstream effect on how much more that drug or that test is going to cost you for your specific population that it wasn't studied on can be tremendous for the government, for the countries. Another example is something like polygenic risk scores. So polygenic risk scores can basically provide a measure of your disease risk based on your genetic makeup. So if those were developed using the European descent, let's say, or ancestry, they are basically up to 4 to 5 times more accurate for people that have a European background. So these numbers can really make huge differences when we are talking about predictive health. And if these polygenic risk scores were developed or at least validated in different populations, such as Middle Eastern populations, they will be much more effective. So it is important. The genetic background and understanding of the genetic architecture is very important, even from perspective of genetic diseases or specific regions within the genome that we're calling allelic frequencies, specific allelic frequencies for specific conditions. Maybe if I'm looking in the European population, I will consider that this part of your genome is actually something that might cause a specific disease, genetic disease. However, if I look at that same part in the Middle Eastern population, it might be just a variation, and it may not actually lead to causing a disease. And you can see how this can then affect, your drug targeting and therapy targets and everything that's gonna come downstream. It's not, genetics is not everything, 100%, but it is definitely very helpful to have that data to be able to actually design better clinical trials and research protocols and drug therapies and so on and so forth.
So Mike, I'll come to you. My question, I know you've got your hand up, you've got a point you want to raise as well, but my question to you is this. Presumably what Hinda's spoken about there in terms of the consequences of not having the data around diverse populations when it comes to creating these clinical trials. The drug manufacturers must be aware of that. So why are they not doing anything about it?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and I'm afraid we could be running in circle for days or years, because we all know of some facts. I think first maybe I'd like to echo Hinda. I'm not a genetic background, but I definitely agree that genetic is about everything, even if we cannot see it, but this is where. I think one of the issue, if I'm going further into the study design, and while the pharmaceutical company or biotech or medtech are currently designing the protocol, and I think I had myself a recent example with customers. Diversifying first, I think something we need to make it clear. What company wants is to enroll patient as soon as possible. Everything is about, it costs billions of US dollars in order to go from phase 1 to phase 4. They are all making R&D. They want to have the market authorization as fast as they can. So they need to enroll X number of patients throughout the different studies. So why they are designing the study and the protocol, I think first, diversifying the clinical trial enrollment is not necessary to meet their objective, because most of them, and most of the case, the sample size is often too small to assess a treatment efficacy within a particular subgroup. I think this is one issue first. That even if we, and maybe I'm going the wrong way here, but even if we, I would say, open diversity into a specific trial, and I think we need to check broader, but into one single clinical trial, it doesn't bring any value, because I think, I don't know, Hinda, if you have some biostatistical background, but even if you include few patients here, whatever the background, I think you raise another good point about how to define diversity. But even if we open truly diversity to the clinical trials and the study design, we speak for phase 1, we could speak about 10 patients, phase 2, 50, 100, phase 3 depend on the therapeutic area. You can have 100, 1,000 patients. So still at the end, the population is very low. One option, but obviously it will cost millions of dollars, is to run specific trials for this specific population. But you can imagine that the pharmaceutical company, which like to get marketing authorization, I think business is business, obviously. They cannot run trials, one for female, one for male, one for Black American, one for Hispanic, one for EU. I think it's just a never-ending story. And finally, I think, as we all know, yes, indeed, the consequences, result may not be applicable to all population. If you test, I think from phase 1 to phase 4, in some cases, you can have less than 500 patients. So you can imagine that if you test a drug on, let's say, 500 patients, and when you have marketing authorization and the drug is available everywhere, you have, due to the genetic background, impacting the drug and the therapies to different kind of population. So not even speaking about genetic, but you can have different safety cases or safety scenario. You can have, it can be harmful to certain groups, and worst case scenario, the drug even may not be effective. So I think this is all the point. And finally, you have also some ethical and, let's say, fairness concern, and also to circle back about trust, because as far as you go to a specific population, what Mansour said, you say, okay, why are you coming to us now? How is a guinea pig? So altogether, you can raise ethical concern, question of mistrust, which could exclude some population, even this is not what you want to do.
So just to be clear on this, Mike, so that I'm understanding this correctly, one of the issues we've got here is that if we want to have an effective view of the effect of a drug on a particular ethnic group, we need to have significant size trial, which is all individuals from that ethnic group. Is that right? Yeah,
I'm not a biostatistician, and that's what I have read, and maybe Inda can step in. But what I know for sure, it's you always have limited information, and one of the issue when a company is doing, you have primary endpoint, secondary endpoint, etc. And if you have subgroups, which means you have a certain population within your trial. So your trial may have 100 patients, and you are doing an analysis on 10 patients, and per se, you cannot do an analysis and a biostatistical analysis on that patient. So yes, I think from a mathematical and biostatistical standpoint, I do foresee, yes, this is an issue here.
So Hinda, that's what you were talking about in terms of creating those biomarkers, isn't it? Is having enough data about individual population groups.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, of course, I am by no means a biostatistician, at all, actually. But what we are seeing now, perhaps as more of a trend when it comes to genetic targeting, is the therapies like cell therapies and gene therapies, and this is where you are dealing with a much smaller population to begin with. I mean, right now, I think there are also several trials for N=1 for specific genetic conditions that are very, very rare. And, if we are talking about genetic conditions, in a lot of cases, you will actually be perfectly fine with the smaller numbers, smaller populations, but this is already set up from the get-go, and the companies already know what they're getting themselves into. And this is why the therapies, gene therapies, or cell therapies cost quite a lot. The costs are often very high because the number of participants is so low, and who the market that you're going to sell this to is also very, very limited. But one point I wanted to add regarding that, the diversity and how can we kind of fix it, or from a genetic perspective, one thing that can be done is thinking about it in terms of the reference genome. So when we think about the human reference genome, that was kind of put together back in 2003, it was really based on mainly one individual of white descent. So that's what the data, and we are still, 20 years later, we are still using that as the reference genome. So what really needs to happen is that all the different population-based sequencing programs need to pitch in. We need to compile a new human reference genome, being Emirati, genome program, Qatar, Saudi, obviously other parts of the world. So this might help in terms of that diversification, where at least the genome that you are looking at, you are covering so many different populations, different races and ethnicities to begin with, rather than what we are doing now. And hopefully, that's gonna happen, because otherwise, why even do all of these population-based sequencing programs?
Thanks. So I want to come to you, a question really that kind of relates to what Mike and Hinder have both been saying there. Is there an issue here around the fact that there's no incentive for drug companies to actually bring diversification into their clinical trial systems? And what I mean by that is, if the incentive, if the objective of the drug company is simply to get a product licensed in a particular territory, and there's no legal requirement for them to actually test on diverse populations, is that the blocker? Is that the reason why we're not seeing diversity in clinical trials? Because simply the drug companies don't need to?
I think so, yeah. Well, that would be the short answer, because that would require a number of steps on their part, wouldn't it? They'd have to make sure that the people that are, the participants for the trial, they'd have to have a different recruitment strategy to have, a more diverse population. That obviously involves spending money, doesn't it, right? I mean, you'd have to produce leaflets in different languages. You'd have to have, say genetic counselors available. So all of that is addressing the cultural language barriers, which requires investment. So in short, yes, that I think would be preventing them. But I think a point to highlight from it is a safety aspect that both Mike has touched on as well, is if the data is sort of, it's skewed and it's only sort of favoring a Caucasian population, it's obviously just going to impede, the healthcare outcome for a patient of non-Caucasian descent that's taking a particular medication. So either it would be suboptimal or it could even be harmful. There could be an unanticipated adverse reaction, something like that. From that perspective, I think it does require the regulators to sort of, step in and look at it from an ethical and patient safety perspective, and to require pharmaceutical companies to address this. But that, as I said, at the moment, we don't have it, simply because it's a catch-22, isn't it? It's because we don't have enough clinical trials happening. And as, Dr. Ibtisam has said, the whole main root function of the Dubai Academic Health Corporation is so we get this investment, we have teaching hospitals, and, we have more development and research. But at the moment, if there's nothing legally or regulatory requiring, how the participant population is formulated, I'm afraid, research companies will just continue going down what is the easier option for them, and not consider the ethical concerns. But certainly, even without there being, say, a legal framework for it, when these trials are being given their IRB approval, I think at that stage, it's something that, the IRB committee could look at and comment on and say, but I don't know in practice if that's happening or if they're giving that feedback. But, from the ground up, if that started happening, then I think it would force pharmaceutical companies to address this. But at the moment, it simply, I think, comes down to money and the cost of doing it.
So I think there's two points that I'd tease out of that one. And I mean, the first comment that I'd make is that at the end of the day, is it a situation of, again, a perverse incentive? So, if you've got states, governments competing to try and attract investment from pharmaceutical companies, then it's not in their interests to legislate a requirement for diversity in clinical trials, because that might put them off investing their money and make them invest their money in somewhere where it's easier and they don't have that legal requirement. Do you think that could be an issue?
But potentially, but as I said, because like the whole, so you have in the UAE, for example, so the healthcare sector has grown hugely. It's got a good infrastructure. Research is sort of catching on, it's developing, but it's not quite at that level. The advantages, I suppose, you have to look at it from an economic perspective as well. If pharmaceutical companies were to sort of move their research here, one of the benefits could be lower costs, cheaper workforce, those sort of things they'd look at. You're right, it's a double-edged sword, because if you put it in the legal framework that no, you've got to have this, but I think it has to, I think the IRB should be addressing this, to be honest with you, at that level. And I don't know if that, it's happening in this region. But yes, it's a catch-22, because if you don't want to put off companies coming here, and because you want to incentivize them, but you have to really address it is obviously an ethical concern, and it's potentially a patient safety risk. So from that perspective, it needs to be addressed.
And apologies for this question, and I completely appreciate you probably won't know the answer to this. Wonder if anybody else on the panel has any insight. Are you aware, or is anybody on the panel aware of any other territory around the world where they have legislated a requirement for diversity in clinical trials? Has that happened anywhere else?
Steve, I'm working across the world, and to my knowledge, I have never seen, and to make the comments, IRB are currently checking about protocol design and safety right now, more or less. But I never seen a single comment about complaining or requesting about improving diversity into a study protocol so far. But I'm not covering all countries, obviously.
Yeah. No, so it's an interesting.
Yeah, I haven't come across it. I don't know if the IRB in other countries in the West are doing that. But then I suppose countries that have got more diverse populations, you think that they would be considering that. In the GCC, we have a diverse population. I mean, if you think, I think in the UAE, I think more than half the population are non-Caucasian, just by the number of expats of Indian, Pakistani, Filipino descent. But I think it's something that it's a difficult one. I think it's a difficult one to regulate in that sense. But if it is leading to potentially harmful outcomes and sort of a disparity effectively, because the non-Caucasian populations are not going to get the same benefit from these trials potentially, is something that, but perhaps it's something that I don't know if it's been. I'm just interested to know how it came up to be a topic for yourselves, because it's obviously something that must have been raised, or perhaps it hasn't been to that level, So, but
I love that. Yeah. That's a great. That's something actually I've been chairing these sessions for the last 5 or 6 years now. And I think that's the first time I've ever had a panelist throw a question back at me. Thanks very much for that, Ray. So that's appreciated. No, I mean, it's quite simply at Arab Health this year. I had Mike out there with us. Also had conversations with Hinder and Mansour and Ibtissim. I was aware that Ibtissim had got investment strategies around attracting pharmaceutical investment into the region. I had a fascinating conversation with Hinder about the Emirati Genome Program, and Mike throwing some of those amazing and incredible statistics that we just talked about the number of clinical trials taking place. So it's one of those situations where I just find the whole thing fascinating. And actually, I've got to say, as this debate unfolds, it's becoming more and more fascinating. Mansour, you wanted to come in with a point.
Yeah, I think being advisors to a lot of these companies who want to come here and being expansion, being an economist, it's all about the money, very bluntly. So I think it's basically why a pharmaceutical company, it used to be very small market. Whether if you see all these new drugs which we are talking about, clinical trials and other, when they come, they're expensive, and they were not sure about it, that if we are basically able to sell those things in this region or not. So if even we do trial and make it perfect for European and Americans and other part of the world, and even if they are less effective here, it doesn't matter, because that's not our market. Sorry, I'll be very blunt here. But I think what happened is, and I'm really proud to be part of that thing, 18 years back, Abu Dhabi, who started this, compulsory health insurance. So I think, and then one by one other. So now people, this pharmaceutical companies and other, they know that if even a drug is launched, which will be expensive, there is an insurance is there who pay for it. Before that, if it was a cash payment and other, and very limited number of people can afford it. So there was not incentive for them to basically do the trials there, because then there may not be, first of all, the population was less, and there may not be, the system is missing, which will sponsor or pay for that, drug when it will actually be launched. So I think like 17, 18 years back, a very, proud to be associated and hold this compulsory health insurance thing started in Abu Dhabi, and then later on everybody is following that. So I think that's one of the key thing is that. Second thing is now increase in income level. So again, it's about the money that if those drugs are coming beside insurance, there are enough population who can afford it, even if they are not covered, or it will be paid by in case of, many of the cases by, UAE, Saudi, Qatar, and other, it will be paid by one of the ministries and other. So I think what I see is that basically the region has become very attractive for these pharmaceutical company just because they can sell those things more easily here. But why they are not coming is, I think, it's lack of those, which, doctor also mentioned, lack of those, which is now we are doing it. All of us, I think this is the aim of everyone to have those teaching universities or teaching hospitals and have the workforce ready. I mean, I think one of the panelists mentioned that, the cheaper workforce here, but in many of the countries, especially if you look at Egypt and other places and Jordan and other, but what about the quality? It's not the cheapest. You need to have a quality workforce. So it's you don't go in healthcare, the cheapest workforce, you go for the quality. So I think that's will also going to change, but there is a lot of emphasis. And Steve, thanks to you, we publish a paper on medical education in your last magazine on Saudi. And we have just issued, I think 2 weeks back, a report on medical education in UAE and in Egypt also, because we think these are the three markets which going to lead this whole thing. So I think I just wanted to comment is that there is change of economic factor. I'm not talking about regulations and other change of economic factor, which will force this pharmaceutical companies to consider this region as a serious player, basically, I would say.
Yeah, I think it's a good point that you raised there, Mansour, that the economic circumstances in the region are there. In terms of the population, in terms of the quality of the healthcare system. They are developing healthcare systems still across the Middle East, but they're developing quickly and they're ambitious. And I want to touch on a bit later in the conversation, the benefits as you develop a health system, the benefits of that health system of having a fertile research environment. There are huge opportunities. So I think that the circumstances are starting to be there that will encourage drug companies to start thinking about these kind of trials in the region. Hindi, you wanted to come in, and then Mike.
Just a quick comment to be realistic. When Mansour is talking also about the insurance and the huge shift that has brought, of course, to the region. But I think it's also important to keep in mind that disparities do still exist. Not everybody has equal access to healthcare, even though you're mandating healthcare insurance does not necessarily mean that you have equal access to that healthcare. I think that, we know, at least within the, let's say, the clinical genetics realm, that in a lot of cases, unless you are a Thiqa holder or an Emirati national, that quite a lot of services will not be covered. And this is also something that, we are talking, I guess, about that equality and even about the incentive of why would you even want to be in a clinical trial or part of a clinical trial if at the end of the day, you're not going to get access to that therapy, even if you need it, or you're going to have to pay quite a lot out of pocket, and not everybody can do that. And so it's important to keep that in mind, even with the big population-based sequencing programs, Emirati Genome Program being one of them. The focus currently is on the local population. So we are not really utilizing the diversity of the population in the UAE because we are not looking at it right now. Based on my understanding, plans are in place that will actually expand and it will go beyond the local population. But in all the different countries, whether it's Egypt or Oman or Saudi, you know, the approach is fairly similar, that it is addressing only the national, you know, of that country, and that just means that others are missing out, and that you are missing out on utilizing also data from the other populations. So it's something to keep in mind, and I think it's something that we should move towards.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's I think one of the attractions of the UAE in terms of diversity of population is the number of expats. So you've got populations from, as I think somebody mentioned earlier on, from India, from Pakistan, from the Philippines, from across Asia. And actually, if I remember rightly, so I'll clarify a point with you, one of the reasons for the creation of the Dubai Academic Health Corporation was to provide universal health coverage and to provide a level of quality coverage to all everybody that's resident and working in Dubai. That's correct, isn't it?
Yeah, true. And I think this is very important when it comes to the equal accessibility to the healthcare system. I think I just want to emphasize on one point. If we have a good data hub as a country in healthcare, that will solve a lot of issues and will attract so many things to the market. And I feel like there is no perfect health system in the world, and there is no perfect country has own a proper data. So if we have a good data and we have a data hub pool where people can have an accessibility to it, whether it's a private or a public, I think that will help to solve so many issues, not on the base of teaching, training, research, but even in development of new technologies and innovations. And I think this is actually my dream to see in healthcare market. And if it's happened, I'll be really happy, because it's going to solve a lot of problems that we sometimes struggle to find a solution for it.
Thanks for that. Mike, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, no, I think very good comment. And before to jump in on the data hub, which I 150% agree, just some background. I think the clinical research, is a race. This is a competition. You have a certain number of clinical trials which are running, and for each of the clinical trials, they need a certain number of patients. And I would be doing a shortcut because it may depend on the strategies, the market, but long story short, they need X number of countries and a certain number of patients. And what they are looking, more or less, there are three things. First, the timelines. And then I know UAE with DHA, DOH have been working in order to expedite, and frankly, you don't have enough you are much better than what we can do in France right now. The second item, this is about the population, the patients, the number of patients you can provide. And finally, this is the data quality. Obviously, pharmaceutical companies, they don't only need patients. They don't only need patients. They need, they don't need to go fast, sorry. They need good data, because they will be using this data for the dossier, for the submission, and for the marketing authorization. And now to jump in on the data hub. I think it's like the genome program, this is like a gold mine, because UAE, and again, I'm taking an example about France, you cannot compete against USA or against China or against India because of the size of the population. What I'm always encouraging, the hospital, because you need to sell yourself as part of this, again, this competition. Why? When a company is currently going to a CRO, asking for a new trial, they will recommend X number of countries. Why? UAE or Saudi Arabia are never on this list, never on the tier 2 or tier 3. They just are not on the list. So what is important is about data quality, data hub, because you need to know yourself, where is your niche, where are your the likelihood for you to enroll the most number of patients for which you can commit. Is it a diabetes, or is it whatever the disease? And this is how you can compete yourself with other countries, because again, don't forget, this is a race. They need patients fast, and they need data. So if you can combine this triangle, and I know because I have been visiting a lot of offices and hospitals in Dubai recently and Abu Dhabi, you have the facilities. You need to sell yourself, and it's all about awareness.
Interesting one, that. I mean, on the point about recruiting patients for trials, I wonder if there's a point that I think Hinda raised very, very early in the conversation about the level of trust in government and the level of trust in the healthcare system in the Middle East. And Ibtisam, I wonder if this is something you could comment on. You know, if you've got a situation where the government is advocating for patients to take part in clinical trials, is that going to help this situation? Is that going to help, because of the trust that people have in government in the region, help with the recruitment of patients for clinical trials?
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. I mean, to do the clinical trials and to build up the whole healthcare system, you really need the people to trust it. And that's why it's all the regulation job as well, to put the proper standard, because at the end, you're looking at the quality of outcome and you're looking at the efficiency and effectiveness of the service. So if the patient doesn't trust your system, therefore, ultimately, they will not come forward for your clinical trials. And we have seen a big change for past 15 years since we give even the service provider to the private sectors, and the quality of the service that they're actually providing and complementing the government service. I mean, that has improved the trust of a patient, and we have seen that in overseas treatment, that many of the nationals people, they prefer to be treated at home rather than traveling. And based on that, we have good hospitals already being invested in the market. You have in Abu Dhabi, you have in Dubai, without mentioning names. And that has taken a great role. So therefore, those big hospitals, even from private sector, not necessarily public sector or semi-government, those are the ones actually are ready to work closely with the pharma company, with the medtech companies to test some of their products. So I feel indeed trust is the main issue. And once you have the population trusting the system and trusting the healthcare providers, that will enhance the clinical trials as well.
Because at the end of the day, the objective here, listening to what Mike was saying before, the objective here, surely from your point of view as the Dubai Health Authorities, as the person looking to attract investment, is to get to a situation where these CROs are putting the UAE amongst those top recommendations for countries to perform clinical trials, isn't it?
Yeah, indeed. So, Mike, if you see, we recently they have created even an ethical committee for the clinical trials, and there are significant people are sitting in there. So whenever there is a new product coming to the market, they need to go through it and to make sure that if they got approved, then they can apply for their license so they can be part of the clinical trials. So you know what I mean? There is really a process they need to go through it. It's maybe a lot of people, they don't know about it, but it's existing. And that's because they want to encourage the clinical trials and research or any new product coming in the market. And when we did even the medtech process for the startups, we actually put that they need to be part of this ethical committee, and the physician who are assigned in the private or a public provider, they need to be part of their trials, so they can have the pool of patients, so they can start doing such a trial. This is existing, by the way, and maybe lots of people they're not aware of it.
It's all about creating the kind of fertile environment for these companies to be able to bring their trials into more easily. Hinda, you've got your hand up. You want to come in?
Sorry, that was a comment regarding the data when we spoke about the data, and I just wanted to highlight the fact that we have the EMR, you know, the electronic medical records that existed, I don't know even for how many years now in Abu Dhabi and in Dubai, and now On top of it, we've got a platform such as Malafi, and I believe there is one for Dubai, and these platforms are going to be integrated. So the fact that basically all of the health medical records are going to be completely integrated for the country, and that you will be able, as a researcher or a research institution, to extract the data, to look at it, to do proper research. I mean, it is such an advantage of a system like the one that we have here. The problem or the challenge seems to be in utilizing that and taking advantage of that, even on a local level. Forget about bringing, from the outside. I mean, even if you want to start in-house, even if I look at entities that exist around us, why aren't we doing more research? Why aren't healthcare providers, or entities doing more research, putting more resources into research? Why don't they have protective time? Why, so I think we need to also kind of focus on that and address that before even going outside of the country and going broader.
It's a really good point that you raised about the EMR systems, and the fact that they're integrating between the Emirates is an astonishing opportunity. I was discussing this, and we got into a conversation about this yesterday, actually, about the sheer amount of data there is that sits within EMR systems, within countries, within even individual hospitals and individual hospital groups that simply isn't being used. We talk about things that we can do with big data. We talk about population health modeling or predictive modeling, that we don't have enough data to be able to do properly. And yet there is this huge pool of data sitting in EMRs that at this point isn't being properly utilized. Ibtisam, you wanted to come in, and then Mansour.
Yes, basically when I spoke about Data Hub, where I meant all the EMR system, including Nabot or Malafi, which is between Abu Dhabi or Dubai, so where you have an integration system between public and the private sector. And this even includes your insurance kind of data, as well as the public health data. So when they integrate them all together, where you are reaching, we are going basically to population health management, where you're thinking how I can improve the longevity of the populations so they have a better life. The consequences of that is basically to become even cost effective. So you don't want to carry a lot of burden on the government if you screen those populations from at early age to have a better lifestyle. So you see, that's all what it meant. And here what you really need, a good education health system as well as a research to support. And if you don't have a proper raw data to provide them, you can't reach where basically we are talking about longevity from now. So this is basically what, when we think of Data Hub, that's actually the consequences where we need to head to. It's not only just to take the data, to monetize it and to become as an ATM machine. It's basically what we are trying to do here. We need to improve the people's health. So this is, I just want to add such a point.
And again, I mean, it coming back to the point about attracting clinical trials, having that kind of level of integrated data available, presumably that's, again, part of creating that fertile environment that allows us to create the circumstances for the kind of diverse clinical trials that we're aiming towards. Mansour, you wanted to come in. There's always a point in one of these conversations where somebody forgets to take themselves off mute.
Sorry about that. I think a couple of things is, one is obviously the trust factor, which everybody is mentioning. I think if you look at, I would say COVID was a blessing in disguise, which created a trust on UAE health system, that people realize that how, it's trustworthy. And when you clinical trial, when I think initially when the COVID vaccine came, initially the Chinese one, I think, doctor, if you confirm, not mistaken, and how it was basically to encourage people, it was the people from the royal family, the health minister, the another minister, they were the first one who was sitting and getting the vaccination and putting the picture. which basically encourage everybody else that if they are getting those vaccination, it's safe, and people should go and do that. I think the second point is relating the data, and there is a lot of data available in UAE in all sort of insurance data, disease data, drugs data, and other. We've been involved in, and I'm proud to say without taking the name, I think private sector, 50% of the hospitals which are being established, and especially in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, we were involved, and personally I was involved in some capacity, either the feasibility and expansion strategy or whatever. Basically, we still face data is there, but accessibility, I do know that there is data privacy laws and all those things, but accessibility is where is the main issue, that we have to dig our own research and get the data, and advising the people to spend a typical hospital's minimum 200 to 300 million US dollars. And so I think that the more it will become hopefully accessible to not to everyone, but at least the people who are involved in either on the medical research side or somebody like us who basically advise the expansion strategies and other things for different healthcare providers. That would be great. So data wise, I think we have one of the best data databases in different pockets in different Emirates, but it's the accessibility. And I think the last comment I would say, a personal comment, is what Hinda has said about accessibility to insurance, TICA and non-TICA and other. And I just wanted to highlight this thing because being here for almost 24 years, 25 years, and my parents came with me immediately after 1 year, and they grow old here. If there is a life-threatening situation or an emergency, immediately, without even looking at what is their nationality background or what insurance is there, and life-threatening, it takes 1 or 2 days to get all the approvals. Personally, I think my parents were never rejected, or myself never rejected by any of treatment just because they are not Emiratis. So this is, I wanted to make a comment because I have seen the way my parents basically gone through, obviously when they go old, but it was never rejected just because they're not Emiratis.
Which I think again speaks to the point that we were discussing with Ibtisam earlier on about the DAHC and the creating of a universal healthcare system in Dubai. Raisna, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on the data point. Yes, there will be this unified health data platform across the UAE, but actually just an important point to make, for example, with NABID, which will be the DHA platform, patients can actually opt out if they want their data to be on that platform. So it's important to understand that consent is a key part here, yeah? So, if somebody doesn't want to consent, and that I think is one of the issues as to why culturally people are hesitant to take part in clinical trials, because they are worried about their privacy, what's going to happen with the data. And we do have, thorough data. We have a general data protection law, and we have a health data law in the UAE, which stipulates when health data can be released in circumstances where you don't have consent from a patient, and research and development would be, one of those areas. So I think maybe perhaps more education, awareness, so people feel more comfortable and feel trusting about what's happening with their data and that their data is protected. I think that will give some reassurance and probably, encourage people to participate in clinical trials that maybe would not have considered that before. So
I think it's a really interesting point and a general point, actually, that the education and socialization of clinical trials, actually people understanding what they're signing up for and the potential benefits and pitfalls is an important part of any strategy in that regard. Hinda, you wanted to come in?
I actually wanted to ask Reza about the ways how quick can we encourage people to participate, or how can we ensure them that all of these protocols are in place, and that the data privacy and anonymization are always the priority, and that their rights are always reserved. What are the ways of kind of achieving that prior to approaching them, about participating in a research project?
I think like sort of community engagement programs would help, and educations in schools and universities, colleges at a ground root level. And I think, perhaps social media, the government getting involved as well, because I think at the moment, you're right, people don't know that if data is being released, data is anonymized. And I think that is something that needs public awareness. But really on a ground level, it's just awareness, as I say, community engagement. I mean, maybe from the perspective, I don't know if it requires sort of engagement on a, for example, I used to work myself for a hospital, and we found where, for example, you had something introduced here, that a brain death law that allows, say, life support to be turned off in the event of brain death. This is something that needed sort of education and awareness to get the message across. And I think with research and data privacy, it's a similar thing. It's really just reaching out, being able to having translations, done as well, because I think culturally language barriers are there. But that, and I suppose having the support of the government to raise awareness, really, social media, public awareness campaigns. I mean, and that's what's so amazing about the Emirati Genome Program, because I think the government did do a public awareness campaign to get more participants, and and I think the local population were it was highlighted the importance of why they should take part and what the benefits would be, and I think that did encourage more people to come. And I think it's something similar here. It's a case of perhaps there needs to be some sort of incentivizing in a way, but what that would require some discussion. But I think people sort of need to know what the general benefits are if they do take place. Because I think one point, just to go back to Steve, is you're asking about, it seems like across the world there isn't specific regulation on the diversity point, because of course any participation in a clinical trial is voluntary, isn't it? And that's the key thing. It's voluntary, so you can't force people to take part if they don't want to. But I think you just say, look, make more awareness and just highlight the benefits overall to the whole population as to what will happen if they do take part. So that is really,
the voluntary point is well made. I think that there is still an issue there about whether authorities could mandate that for a clinical trial to have efficacy, it must include a level of diversity. I think that's kind of the point that I was making from that point of view. We've got about 6 or 7 minutes left. Prior warning panel, I'm going to come to each of you in a moment and ask for your sort of one takeaway, your 1 minute takeaway from this morning's session. Before I do, though, I had one more question really for you, Ibtisam, around the issue of clinical trials. The ambition of we've worked together for the last sort of several years now, and the ambition in the health economy of Dubai to become a world-leading health economy has always been clear and evident. How important is developing a fertile research element to your health system, to that ambition of becoming a world-leading health economy?
It is very essential, Steve, because if you want to support the economy, and especially the new technology, you really need to have an educational institute around you, including a research part as well. So we're working hard. I mean, the regulation team with the academy team involved in so many activities, and they're trying to encourage more of that, and hopefully we could see more of them in coming future.
Fantastic. So 1 minute each, please. What's your main takeaway from this morning's session? Mansoor, let's start with you. What's your big takeaway from this morning?
I think the main takeaway is that everybody's committed, and the right time is there. There will be some incentives. Another thing will be required, because healthcare system as a provider, another hospital, another, they are very basically profitable. But doing the life sciences thing and doing the the research-based education, another, that is where government incentive will be required there, because they are mostly not commercially viable. And there will be, I mean, there is more, and the awareness is there. And so I believe this thing will grow. This time you are doing one session. I think next time you'll be doing a conference on it. So
you could well be right. You
Yeah.
could well be right, Mansoor. Fantastic. Raisa, what's your takeaway on this conversation?
Yeah, I think, as I say, I mean, the potential is obviously there, because the government and just, generally the healthcare sector, they want research and development to grow in this region. I think there just needs to be improved recruitment strategies with regard to the participants. And that, I think, requires government support. I think it requires education, training, as I said, outreach programs. And really the key point is addressing the cultural factors that are at the root of the mistrust for why people have, not wanted to take part in clinical trials. And I think if that happens, then we'll hopefully see a shift, and we will then see a more diversified population taking part in trials.
Thanks so much for that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. Hinda, over to you. What's your takeaway from this morning's conversation?
I would say that before we can talk about diversity in clinical trials, or even the existence of clinical trials in general, that we need to go back to the basics, and that is research. That we have to encourage research. We have to emphasize the importance of building that foundation. So we can't talk about, pharmaceutical companies coming in, drug therapies, product development, and any of it, without having the research. And I think that maybe one of the ways of doing it would be to mandate research on healthcare facilities, providers, so that it's not just limited to academic institutions and universities. Obviously, the ideal case scenario is what Dubai is doing, with the Dubai Health Corporation, where you have that communication and the triangle that, Dr. Ibtisam mentioned. But maybe if research is mandated all across, any healthcare providers, any institutions, perhaps even if the percentage of GDP is actually dedicated and spent on R&D, maybe that will create that ecosystem, and foundation upon which we can build, and then we can talk about bringing in more clinical trials and diversity and, startups and biopharma and everything else. So research.
Research, said like a true scientist. Thank you very much for that. And Ibtisam, what's your takeaway from this morning's session?
Well, I really believe to have kind of a proper data hub where all the data talks to each other, not scattered, and to act on it. So that will benefit the research itself, and to have a governance framework. So that's the tool that the governments needs to own it properly.
Fantastic. And Mike, finally to you, as somebody, as the individual in the room with the kind of most experience and knowledge of putting together clinical trials, what's the immediate thing? What's the kind of next step in terms of attracting diverse clinical trials to the region?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I think Hinda was a very good point. I think how to go to the root, to the background. I think first, public awareness. I think it would definitely help about if we are speaking a lot about trust. I think, and I would say as a whole, research and clinical research as a pillar and part of the life science and healthcare system. I think it would definitely help. And yes, maybe diversity should come after. So I think this is something. As I was flagging during this discussion, I think clinical research, is a competition between countries. And if you refer to the cost, patient, and timeline triangles, I think you don't have to be ashamed. I think within the Middle East and in the and more specifically in the UAE, I think I had a chance myself to visit some hospitals and research centers. You have high level of education, you have the technology, you have high level facilities, you have the diversity population, you do have regulatory process in place with fast timelines. I think the country and the region, I think, are strong assets. But what I'm used to say, it's you are good, but more or less nobody knows. So this is where you definitely need to hack and to work in order to raise awareness. I think we spoke about a lot about data. We spoke about education, training local staff, providing and having people dedicating with clear metrics and KPIs and data available with prevalence of disease. I think it's just a package about how you could first attract people, attract companies, but in the right way, because before attracting them, and I think we need to start from the beginning, before to start to attract people, you need to be prepared yourself. I think all panel audience here were raising exactly the same point, maybe first, check internally what you can do before to expand. So I think this would be my takeaway about engaging after with international CRO, biotech, medtech, in order to, at the end, because you can good and you can deliver, being part of this listing of CRO where you are part of the country and site selection will give you the opportunity to bring more innovative treatment. Because again, this is all about patient safety and how we can improving life of the local citizens.
Thanks very much for that, Mike. And that's it. That's the end of another fantastic Healthcare World Series session. For me, I think my takeaway would be that it's all about creating that fertile environment, creating the environment, whether it's with research, with data, with socialization, with the right regulatory framework that will make it easier for research organizations to base themselves and start to provide that level of diversity in clinical trials that we're all looking for. It only remains to thank a fantastic panel for a really enjoyable debate. I hope that everybody out there watching enjoyed that as much as I did. Thanks to Reza Afzal, thanks to Ibtisam Al-Bastaki, Mike Faye, Mansour Ahmed and Hinda. My name's Steve Gardner. It's been a great session. If you want to watch it back, it will be available on our website later on today. We'll also hopefully post it on LinkedIn. Thank you all very much for watching, and we'll see you at the next Healthcare World Series. Thanks very much. Goodbye.